Hey warriors, welcome back to the channel. I want to tell you about someone I used to know. My closest friend, the kind of person who would drive 4 hours at midnight because you called and sounded off. The kind who remembered everyone's birthday, forgave every betrayal, and kept showing up even when showing up cost him everything. I watched him pour himself into people like water into sand. And just like sand, they absorbed every drop and stayed exactly the same. 3 years later, I ran into him at a coffee shop, same face, different eyes. Something had gone quiet behind them. Not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of a man who has decided something permanently. I asked him what happened. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "The world didn't change. I did. I stopped being easy to break." That sentence stayed with me because I realized it wasn't just his story. It was mine. And right now, sitting wherever you're watching this, it's yours too. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. Right now, there are two versions of you living inside the same body. Version 1 explains, apologizes, tolerates, stays up at night replaying conversations trying to figure out what they could have said differently so that person would finally see their worth. Version 1 bends, absorbs, forgives without condition, and mistakes that forgiveness for strength. Version 1 is the one who keeps giving and keeps getting less in return and keeps telling themselves that one day the people they love will finally notice. Then there's version 2. Version 2 doesn't argue, doesn't beg, doesn't chase. Version 2 removes without noise, without announcement, without guilt. Version 2 isn't cold, they're certain. And certainty, real certainty, is the rarest thing on earth. You've been living as version 1 for too long. And look, I'm not here to shame you for that. Version 1 is what they built you to be. Schools, families, society, they all reward the explainer, the apologizer, the one who keeps the peace. They punish the one who walks away. They call it cruelty. They call it ego. They have 100 names for it, and every single one of those names is designed to keep you manageable. Today, I'm going to show you the 8 shifts that separate these two versions of you. Each one will cost something. Each one will feel like burning a part of yourself you've been carrying for years. But if you stay with me until the end, you will walk away fundamentally different from the person who pressed play. Machiavelli once wrote that the world belongs to those who know what they want and are willing to pay the price to get it. The price here isn't money, it isn't even time. It's the old version of you, and the part that gets me, every single time I think about this, is that most people never pay it. They hold on to version 1 until version 1 destroys them completely. Before we begin, I want you to do one thing. Drop this in the comments right now. I will not break again. Not because it's a slogan, because saying it out loud is the first act of a person who has decided. The first shift is the hardest one, not because it's the most complex, but because it attacks the thing you were most proud of. Your biggest weakness was never your heart. It was where you placed it. Look, you've been told your whole life that generosity is a virtue, and in a perfect world, it is. But here's the thing about the world you actually live in. In the psychology of power, what's freely given is subconsciously devalued, every time, without exception. This isn't a cynical opinion, it's a documented pattern of human behavior that goes back further than recorded history. When you give without condition, the receiving brain doesn't register gratitude. It registers access. It files you under available. And available things don't command respect. They get used. You've been bleeding your energy into people who feed off your light, but never once turn around to ask how you're doing. You kept helping, kept forgiving, kept explaining, hoping that maybe this time, finally, they'd see your worth. And they never did. And here's what they never tell you about why. They didn't need to. Because you never made seeing your worth a requirement for your presence. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that men are quicker to offend one who is loved than one who is feared. The ungrateful exploit your goodness precisely because they don't fear losing it. They've run the math unconsciously, and the math keeps checking out. You'll stay, you'll forgive, you'll rationalize their behavior with something like, they're going through a hard time, or that's just how they are. That's not compassion. That's self-delusion wearing compassion's clothes. Here is the underlying truth most people ignore. This is the mechanism. It's called emotional dependence disguised as kindness. The moment someone senses that your presence is unconditional, they stop valuing the condition. You train them. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but you train them, one unanswered disrespect at a time, that you were safe to ignore. The ungrateful are not evil. They're opportunistic. They don't hunt your body. They hunt your guilt. They make you feel bad for protecting yourself. They twist your empathy into a lever and pull it every time you try to walk away. After everything I've been through, I thought you were different. I guess I was wrong about you. And you stay. Because version 1 always stays. Here's the ruthless reframe. Your care is a privilege, not a right, not an obligation, not a default setting that runs regardless of how someone treats you. Every ounce of energy you pour into the wrong people is power stolen directly from your future. Not metaphorically, literally. The time you spent explaining yourself to someone who had already decided you didn't matter, that time is gone. The emotional bandwidth you gave to people who drained you, gone. And the version of you that could have been built with that energy, still waiting. Detachment is your defense. Indifference, not hatred, not bitterness, clean indifference, is your correction. When you stop answering every call, stop forgiving every violation, stop explaining your silence to people who manufactured it, something shifts. They panic, they reach, because they realize they can no longer feed off your reactions. And that's when the power moves, quietly, completely, permanently, back to you. Some people deserve your distance more than your devotion. Let that land. Because the moment that becomes true for you, not just words but a lived reality, you'll discover something that makes the next shift feel almost inevitable. And the next shift is the one that will change how you look at every hard thing that's ever happened to you. Pain is the purest teacher you will ever have, not because it's fair, not because it's deserved, but because it is the only force in your life that never lies to you. Think about the last time someone really hurt you. Not a minor inconvenience. I mean the kind of pain that sat in your chest for weeks. The kind that made you replay conversations at 2 a.m, searching for the moment it went wrong. The kind that made you question your judgment, your worth, your ability to read people. That pain had something to tell you. And I'd be willing to bet you spent most of your energy trying to make it stop instead of listening to what it was saying. Here's the thing most people get completely wrong about suffering. They treat it like a malfunction. Like something has gone wrong with the program, and the goal is to get back to baseline as quickly as possible. Distract yourself, stay busy, find someone to vent to, maybe cry a little, move on. And I understand that instinct. I lived it for years. But that approach doesn't make you stronger. It makes you softer in exactly the places you need to be hard. And it guarantees you'll end up in the same situation again, with a different face across the table, wondering why this keeps happening to you. The difference between the broken and the powerful isn't the amount of pain they felt. Write that down somewhere. It's what they did with it. Weak people drown in pain because they keep searching for fairness. They're still waiting for the universe to balance the ledger, for the person who betrayed them to finally apologize, for the situation to be acknowledged as unjust, for someone to say, "You were right, and this wasn't okay." And look, sometimes that happens. But the ruthless don't wait for it. Because waiting for fairness from a world that doesn't operate on fairness is how years disappear. Machiavelli once wrote that a wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men, and to imitate those who have been supreme. And what did the great ones do with their suffering? They studied it. They strip-mined it for every piece of information it contained. They asked not, "Why did this happen to me?" but, "What does this reveal about where I placed my trust, my energy, my belief?" Pain is information. That's the reframe, not punishment, not proof that you're cursed or unlucky or fundamentally flawed. Information. Every betrayal shows you exactly who you trusted too easily. Every rejection reveals precisely where you placed your worth in someone else's hands. Every loss exposes an illusion you were living inside, and illusions, however comfortable, are prisons. When you start viewing pain through that lens, something extraordinary happens. It stops being a wound and starts being a map. You start using it to sharpen your mind instead of destroy it. You stop asking, "How do I get over this?" and start asking, "What advantage is hidden inside this that I haven't found yet?" And I know how that sounds, cold, calculating. Like I'm asking you to stop being human. I'm not. I'm asking you to be more human than you've ever been, which means being honest about what your pain is actually telling you instead of numbing it into silence. The dark psychology of transformation lives here, in this exact space. Most people cry to feel better. The strong reflect to get stronger. When they're hurt, they don't chase closure from the person who hurt them, because closure sought from the source of your wound is just more vulnerability dressed up as healing. They create power instead. They study what happened with the cold precision of someone who intends to never be caught in that position again. They turn every heartbreak into emotional discipline, every disappointment into sharper focus, every humiliation into fuel for something the person who humiliated them will never get to witness. Machiavelli believed that never was anything great achieved without danger. He understood that the forge, the actual heat, is where the metal becomes something different than it was. You don't become untouchable in comfort. You become untouchable in the moments that were supposed to break you and didn't, or did break you, and you rebuilt anyway, harder than before. Right. And this is the part no one tells you. Once you survive your own worst suffering with your eyes open, no one can use fear of pain against you anymore. That's a specific kind of power that cannot be faked and cannot be taken. When someone tries to manipulate you through guilt, through rejection, through the threat of withdrawal, it stops working. Because you've already been through worse and you're still standing. The lever they're reaching for isn't connected to anything anymore. You removed it yourself, in the dark, alone, when you decided to study the fire instead of just running from it. You no longer carry your scars with shame. You wear them like armor. Your silence becomes heavy with what you've survived. Your presence shifts, and people feel it even when they can't name it. That's the aura of someone who has turned every wound into wisdom. And that energy commands a specific kind of respect, not the performance kind, not the kind you earn by being loud or impressive, the kind that lives in the nervous system of everyone in the room with you. If you're still here and you feel something shifting inside you, hit subscribe, because we go much deeper on this every week. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, because some people are still trying to get over their pain instead of using it. The next time life hurts you, don't curse it. Don't perform your suffering for an audience that will forget it by Tuesday. Sit with it. Ask yourself with genuine curiosity, what advantage is hidden here that I haven't found yet? Because every moment of agony carries a seed of dominance if you're ruthless enough to dig for it. Because once you understand that your pain is working for you, not against you, the next question becomes even more dangerous. If pain is information and silence is strategy, then what exactly have you been giving away every time you opened your mouth to explain yourself to someone who was never really listening? The hunger to be understood is the most elegant trap ever built for a powerful mind. Think about the last time you explained yourself to someone who had already made up their mind about you. You laid it out carefully. Your intentions, your reasoning, the context they were missing. You were thorough. You were honest. You genuinely believed that if you just found the right words, they would finally get it. And what happened? Nothing changed. Or worse, they took everything you just handed them and used it to argue against you more precisely. Because that's what explanation does in the wrong hands. It doesn't build understanding, it builds ammunition. Here's the truth that nobody in your life ever sat you down and said clearly. Most people don't listen to understand you, they listen to categorize you. The moment you open your mouth to justify your choices, your silence, your distance, your standards, you are not having a conversation, you are being processed, filed, assessed for weaknesses. And every word you add to that filing is a gift you didn't have to give. In dark psychology, this is called the transparency trap. When people know your motives, they know exactly how to manipulate you. When they understand what you need, validation, to be seen as good, to be believed, they know precisely which lever to pull to get the reaction they want. Your openness, which you were taught to think of as a virtue, is functionally a vulnerability. Not always, not with everyone, but with the wrong people. And look, you've met those people. You're probably thinking of one right now. Your transparency is the blueprint they use to take you apart. That's why the ruthless stay silent. Not because they have nothing to say, because they understand that the person who controls the information controls the dynamic. They let others guess. Project, assume, fill the silence with their own noise. And in that confusion, in that space where no one knows exactly what you're thinking or why you did what you did, you remain untouchable. Machiavelli once said that he who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command. And here's what he meant by that. Command doesn't come from explanation. It comes from presence, from the willingness to act without justifying every action to everyone affected by it. Power doesn't defend itself. It doesn't write long messages at midnight explaining its position. It simply exists, and its existence is the statement. Think about the most quietly powerful people you've ever encountered. Not the loudest ones, not the ones performing confidence for an audience, the ones who made you slightly nervous without doing anything overtly threatening. They weren't loud. They were composed. And what made them composed was this. They had stopped needing you to understand them. Their self-concept didn't depend on your interpretation of it. And that independence, that complete internal sufficiency, is what made their presence feel like pressure. Every time you rush to explain your intentions, you are revealing something far more important than your intentions. You are revealing that your peace depends on someone else's verdict. You are demonstrating that their opinion of you has weight, enough weight to make you scramble. And the moment someone sees that, they know they have leverage, right? That's the mechanism. Not malicious necessarily, but automatic. Human beings test the limits of what influences others, the same way water finds cracks. And every explanation you give is another crack. Machiavelli wrote that the wise man does at once what the fool does finally. Apply that here. The wise stop justifying themselves early, before the habit of seeking approval becomes the architecture of their entire personality. The fool keeps talking, keeps explaining, keeps hoping the next sentence will finally land. Until one day they look up and realize they've spent years in a courtroom they built themselves, prosecuting and defending simultaneously, exhausted, and no closer to a verdict. You don't owe anyone clarity about your choices. Read that again slowly. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your distance, for your silence, for your standards, for the way you changed. Let them misunderstand. Let them tell the story wrong. Let them assume you've become cold, detached, arrogant. Because here's what they never tell you about that. Every false label someone gives you is another layer of armor. Every time they misread you, they reveal exactly how much they were relying on your transparency to keep you manageable. And the moment you stop correcting them, you step outside their ability to predict you. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening here, unpredictability isn't a personality flaw, it's a force field. People cannot manipulate what they cannot map. The moment your responses stop being foreseeable, the moment your emotional reactions stop following the script they've written for you, something fundamental shifts in how they engage with you. They become careful. And careful is exactly where you want them. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's weaponized composure. It creates tension in other people, not in you. It makes them nervous, second-guess themselves, fill the air with their own revelations while you watch and learn exactly who they are when they don't have your reactions to orient themselves by. That's psychological dominance without a single raised voice. Without a single sentence, you'll regret. The truth is your weapon, not your shield. Stop using it defensively. Stop deploying it to prove your innocence to people who have already decided. Save it. Hold it. Those who truly value you will never require an explanation for your existence. And those who require constant explanation from you were never valuing you to begin with. They were managing you. Once you stop needing to be understood by everyone, something quietly extraordinary happens. You begin, for the first time, to actually understand yourself. Because you're no longer spending every available unit of mental energy translating yourself for an audience that wasn't paying attention. That energy comes back to you. And what you do with it next, that's what the next shift is about. Because silence is only the beginning. The real question, the one that separates the people who intellectually understand this from the ones who actually live it, is what you do with your emotions when everything in you wants to reach out, chase, beg for the thing that's walking away. And that question is where most people lose everything they've built. Begging is the moment power dies, not dramatically, not all at once. It happens quietly. A text sent after you promised yourself you wouldn't. A call made just to hear their voice. An apology offered for something you didn't do because the silence became unbearable. Each one feels small in the moment. Each one feels justified. And each one carves another piece out of the version of you that was supposed to be untouchable. Think about the last time you chased something that was walking away. A person, an approval, a relationship that had already ended, but nobody had said it out loud yet. You told yourself it was love. You told yourself it was loyalty. You told yourself that fighting for people is what good people do. And maybe that's true. In a world where fighting and chasing meant the same thing. But they don't. Fighting for something means protecting what's real. Chasing something means running after what's already decided it doesn't want you. And the distinction between those two things is the difference between dignity and desperation. Here's the truth about what chasing actually communicates. Not what you intend it to communicate. What it actually lands as in the nervous system of the person you're chasing. It communicates that you have evaluated the situation and decided that their presence is worth more than your self-respect. That's the message. Clean and simple. And once someone receives that message, once they understand at a gut level that you will absorb disrespect rather than walk away from it, they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. One they don't have to work particularly hard to access. Machiavelli once wrote that the one who is not master of himself cannot be master of others. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because mastery of yourself doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means your emotions don't get to make your decisions. It means that the part of you that wants to call at 2 in the morning is not the part of you that gets to dial. The ruthless detach not because they feel less, often they feel more, and more precisely, than anyone around them. They detach because they refuse to be owned by what they feel. There is a profound difference between experiencing an emotion and being controlled by it. One is humanity. The other is a leash. When someone pulls away from someone who has mastered detachment, something interesting happens. They don't argue. They don't explain. They don't send the message they drafted 3 times and deleted twice. They observe. They get quiet. And they watch. Because pulling away is information. And as we established in the last shift, information is what the powerful collect while everyone else is performing their feelings for an audience. When someone disrespects them, they don't plead. They vanish. Not with drama. Not with a closing statement designed to make the other person feel the weight of what they're losing. Just gone. Quietly. Completely. And that silence, That clean and total withdrawal of presence lands harder than any argument ever could. Because absence from someone who used to be present is deafening. Absence from someone who used to react is terrifying. It means the lever stopped working. And when a lever stops working, the person who was pulling it suddenly has to confront the fact that they never actually had control. They just had access. In a world built on emotional manipulation, detachment is the ultimate rebellion. It doesn't just protect you. It dismantles the entire system being used against you. Manipulators run on reaction. Your anger, your tears, your desperate need to fix the situation. That's the fuel. The moment you stop supplying it, the engine dies. They have nothing to work with. And here's what they never tell you about that moment. It's not satisfying the way revenge is satisfying. It's quieter than that. It feels more like setting down something very heavy that you've been carrying for so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. Machiavelli understood that men are driven by two principal impulses, love and fear. And he understood something more important still, that the person who can master their own attachment controls both. Because when you are no longer driven by the need for someone's love, you cannot be threatened with its removal. And when you are no longer afraid of losing access to someone, the fear they've been using to keep you in place evaporates completely. You become, in the most literal psychological sense, immune to the primary tools of manipulation. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening here, this is not coldness. Coldness is the absence of feeling. What we're describing is something entirely different. It's the presence of feeling combined with the discipline not to let that feeling make decisions that cost you your dignity. You can love someone deeply, genuinely, completely, and still walk away the moment they demonstrate that your self-respect is not safe in their hands. That's not a contradiction. That's the highest form of self-possession. The ruthless understand three things that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not every emotion deserves expression. And not every relationship deserves revival simply because it once mattered. You must learn to close doors quietly, without announcement, without the closing speech, without making your exit a performance that keeps you emotionally tethered to the thing you're leaving. Make your distance feel like what it is, a consequence, a natural result of someone having demonstrated, repeatedly and clearly, that they don't value what they had. Right. And this is the part that changes everything. When you stop chasing, when you genuinely stop and redirect that energy back into yourself, the people who were walking away start turning around. Not always, not everyone, but enough of them, often enough, that you begin to understand something about human psychology that most people never figure out. We are wired to pursue what moves away from us and to take for granted what stays. The moment you stop being the one who waits, you become the one who decides. And that shift, from waiter to decider, is one of the most fundamental changes in power that a human being can experience. Because when you stop begging, you stop bleeding. And when you stop bleeding, nobody can feed on you again. But here's what nobody talks about after you make that choice. After you've detached, after you've stopped chasing, after you've reclaimed your energy and redirected it toward yourself. The question that emerges is not about other people anymore. It's about the structure you build around what you've reclaimed. Because energy without a boundary is just energy. And without what comes next, everything you've built so far has no walls. Your life is an open field right now. Maybe you don't feel it that way. Maybe it feels managed, controlled, reasonably organized. But look honestly at who has access to you. Look at who can reach you at any hour and expect a response. Look at who you've forgiven 3, 4, 5 times for the same violation because confronting it felt worse than absorbing it. Look at who you've contorted yourself around, your schedule, your standards, your self-respect, just to keep a peace that was never really peace. It was just the temporary absence of conflict that you purchased with pieces of yourself. That's an open field. And open fields don't stay empty. They get occupied. Here's the thing about boundaries that nobody explains correctly. They are not walls built to keep people out. That framing makes them sound defensive, reactionary, like something you construct after you've already been wounded. Boundaries are not responses to damage. They are the architecture of a person who understands their own value before anyone else gets the chance to demonstrate that they don't. They are not about other people at all. They are a declaration about you, about what is and isn't permitted in the space you occupy, about what access to you actually costs. And right now, for most of you watching this, access to you costs nothing. It's free, available, renewable regardless of how it's been used. You've been taught to think of that availability as generosity, as openness, as the mark of someone with a big heart. But in the psychology of power, and look, I check this against everything I've studied, and it holds every time. What costs nothing is valued at nothing. Not consciously, not with malice, automatically. The human brain assigns worth based on scarcity and consequence. When there is no consequence for crossing your lines costs nothing. And things that cost nothing get done constantly. Machiavelli once wrote that a prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised. Strip away the medieval framing, and what he's saying is this: if you cannot guard yourself, no one else will. The world does not reward openness. It does not look at your vulnerability and feel moved to protect it. It looks at your vulnerability and files it under opportunity. Not because people are monsters, but because that's how power moves through human systems. It flows toward the unguarded, always, without exception. And it takes from whoever left the door open. You've been taught that saying no is selfish, that setting limits makes you difficult, that maintaining standards is arrogance. And I want you to understand something about where that teaching came from. It came from people who benefited from your compliance. It came from systems that run more smoothly when you absorb more than your share. It came from everyone who ever needed you to be available, forgiving, and endlessly renewable. Those people were not teaching you virtue. They were teaching you to be useful to them. And you learned the lesson perfectly. The absence of boundaries is not kindness. It is self-betrayal dressed in the language of generosity. Every time you tolerated disrespect to keep the peace, you surrendered a piece of yourself. Every time you forgave without any corresponding consequence, you taught them that forgiveness was automatic, that it didn't need to be earned, that the violation had no real cost. Every time you let someone cross a line because confronting it felt too uncomfortable, you moved the line. And lines that move are not lines. They're suggestions, and suggestions get ignored. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening here, this is the mechanism behind why the same situations keep recurring in your life. Not because you're unlucky, not because you attract a certain type, because you have been demonstrating consistently and clearly that certain behaviors are acceptable within the space you occupy. You have been the one setting the price, and the price has been too low. In dark psychology, boundaries are not defensive structures. They are instruments of control. The person who enforces them, calmly, consistently, without drama or lengthy explanation, dictates the terms of every relationship they're in. When you can say no without guilt, without a paragraph of justification, without immediately offering an alternative to soften the impact, you communicate something that goes beyond the specific situation. You communicate that your standards exist independently of other people's comfort, that your worth is not negotiable, that access to you is earned and maintained, not assumed. Machiavelli also wrote that he who allows himself to be deceived is deserving of deception, which sounds brutal until you understand what he meant. You teach people how to treat you, not through speeches, not through what you say you'll tolerate, through what you actually tolerate repeatedly over time with your behavior. That is the curriculum. And most people have been teaching a course called "I will absorb whatever you give me and come back for more," without ever realizing they enrolled in it. The moment you start protecting your space like it matters, and here's the ruthless part, it has to actually matter to you first. Not as a strategy, as a genuine internal reality, everything changes. The parasites vanish. Not because you drove them away dramatically, because the environment no longer supports them. Chaos requires an open field. Enforce the boundary, and the field closes. The noise fades. The people who were there for what they could take from you quietly disappear, and what remains, what actually remains, is something you haven't seen clearly in a long time. The people who were there for you, those who respect your rules instead of resenting them, those who, when you say, "This doesn't work for me," respond with understanding instead of punishment. Those are the ones worth keeping, and you couldn't see them clearly before because they were buried under everyone else's noise. Boundaries attract quality. They repel corruption. They filter automatically, efficiently, without any effort on your part beyond simply maintaining them. The loyal from the opportunistic. Your presence becomes something felt differently, not freely available, earned. And what is earned is what is kept. Every boundary you set is a declaration, not to them, to yourself. This is where my peace begins. This is the perimeter of the person I am becoming. And those who truly value you, the ones worth the space they occupy in your life, will never ask you to lower that perimeter. They'll stand outside it with patience, with respect, with the quiet understanding that what's inside is worth waiting for. Drop this in the comments. My boundaries protect me. But here's what I need you to understand about what comes after the boundary is set. After you've closed the field, after you've stopped explaining and stopped chasing and stopped rewarding violation with access, there is a new kind of power available to you, one that doesn't require any action at all, one that works precisely because of what you don't do, what you don't say, what you refuse to fill the air with. And most people have been terrified of it their entire lives without understanding that terror is exactly the point. Most people are afraid of silence, not the comfortable kind, not the silence of a quiet morning or a room you share with someone you trust completely. The other kind. The silence that falls after someone says something designed to provoke you and you don't respond. The silence that fills a conversation when you stop performing the reaction they came to collect. The silence that happens when you withdraw your noise from a dynamic that was running entirely on your emotional output. That silence. Most people cannot hold it for more than a few seconds before something in them breaks and rushes to fill it. And that breaking, that compulsive need to fill the void, is one of the most exploited vulnerabilities in human psychology. Here's the truth about silence that changes everything once you genuinely understand it. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication at its most concentrated. Every word you don't say is a word they cannot use against you. Every reaction you withhold is a reaction they cannot build a strategy around. Every time you let silence sit in a room instead of filling it with explanation, justification, or defense, you are doing something that most people are completely incapable of. You are controlling the information environment, and the person who controls the information environment controls the dynamic, always, without exception. Machiavelli once wrote that never reveal all your thoughts, for it makes you predictable and vulnerable. And look, predictability sounds neutral, maybe even positive, reliable, consistent. But in the psychology of power, predictability is a liability. The moment someone can map your emotional responses, the moment they know that this particular action will produce that particular reaction from you. They own a piece of you. They have a lever. And levers get pulled, not necessarily out of malice, out of habit, out of the natural human tendency to push on things that move. The moment you become unreadable, that lever disappears. Think about the quietest person you've ever been in a room with, the one whose silence had weight to it, whose stillness made you slightly self-conscious, who seemed to be observing everything without offering their own internal state as currency in the social exchange. Remember how that felt. There was something about their presence that demanded a certain carefulness. You chose your words more deliberately around them. You were more aware of what you were revealing, not because they did anything threatening, because they did nothing. And the nothing was what made the room feel different. That's psychological dominance without a single aggressive act. That's power operating through restraint rather than force. And it is available to you completely, immediately, the moment you decide that not every silence needs to be filled and not every provocation deserves a response. In dark psychology, silence functions as a mirror. When you say nothing, other people are forced to confront their own reflection. They fill the space with their insecurities, their assumptions, their attempts to read you. They reveal their motives in the process of trying to figure out yours. They expose their anxiety by trying to provoke a reaction that would relieve it. And you, watching all of this from behind your composure, are collecting information that they are handing you freely, voluntarily, in the desperate attempt to make you react. Right. And this is the part that most people miss completely. Silence doesn't just protect you from revealing yourself. It actively extracts information from others. Every time you let someone fill the silence, they surrender something. Every pause you hold in a conversation slightly increases the pressure on the other person to say something, anything, to relieve the tension. And what people say under pressure is almost always more honest than what they say when they feel safe and in control. Your silence is an interrogation tool, a gentle one, an invisible one, but extraordinarily effective. Machiavelli believed that power thrives in perception, that the less people know about your intentions, the more they fear them. And fear, properly understood, is not about terror. It's about uncertainty. People fear what they cannot predict. They fear what they cannot map. They fear the person in the room who seems entirely self-contained, who doesn't need the conversation to go a certain way, who doesn't need to be liked or understood or validated by the outcome. That person makes them nervous in a way they can't quite articulate. And nervous people are careful people. Careful people don't cross lines carelessly. The loudest person in any room is almost never the most powerful one. The loudest person is the one working hardest to establish their position, which means their position isn't yet established. Watch the quiet ones. The ones who don't explain their authority because they don't need to. The ones who speak rarely and precisely, and then let the words sit in the air without chasing them with qualifications. Those are the ones the room orients around without quite realizing it's happening. This is the psychological reality of restraint. This isn't about being mysterious for the sake of aesthetic. It isn't a performance. The silence we're talking about is the natural byproduct of someone who has genuinely stopped needing external validation to feel certain about who they are. When you are no longer looking to the room to confirm your worth, you stop broadcasting constantly in the hope that something you say will land well enough to provide that confirmation. The silence comes naturally. It's what's left when the anxiety is gone. When someone insults you, stay silent. Watch what happens. Watch them sit in what they just said without your reaction to justify it or redirect it. Watch them either double down and reveal exactly how little they have, or watch them get uncomfortable in their own cruelty without your distress to make it feel powerful. Your silence doesn't absorb the insult. It reflects it back. And insults reflected back land on the person who threw them with an entirely different weight. When someone provokes you, give no reaction. Let their desperation fill the air. Let them escalate into a space where you are simply observing, calm, unhurried, utterly unimpressed. There is nothing more disarming to someone who came prepared for a fight than the quiet realization that the fight isn't coming, that you are not available for it, that you looked at what they offered and decided, without drama, that it wasn't worth your energy. Machiavelli said the wise guard themselves with quiet. The fool defends himself with words, and every word you use to defend yourself against someone who has already decided to attack you is a word that extends the engagement. Silence ends it. On your terms, without conceding anything. The moment you stop explaining, you stop playing defense. And the moment you stop playing defense, You start commanding the game instead of reacting to it. Power doesn't beg to be understood, it demands to be felt. And in a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, where the noise is constant and relentless and increasingly desperate, the one who masters silence becomes something genuinely rare, impossible to read, impossible to provoke, impossible to defeat. But silence without the next shift is incomplete, because silence protects what you have. What comes next determines who you give it to, and more importantly, how much of it you give, and when you take it back. And this is the shift that the world will call your coldest quality, the one they'll misunderstand most completely, the one that is, in reality, your most sophisticated. Loyalty is the most beautiful trap ever built for a powerful mind. Think about what you were taught about loyalty from the very beginning. Stay, show up, don't abandon people when things get hard, be the one who can be counted on, no matter what. And there is something genuinely noble in that teaching. In a world where everyone is looking for someone they can trust completely, loyalty feels like the highest thing you can offer. It feels like character, like integrity, like the mark of a person worth knowing. And here's what nobody told you about what happens when you give it without condition. The moment your loyalty becomes unconditional, the moment someone understands that you will stay, regardless of how they treat you, that your devotion is not connected to their behavior in any meaningful way. It stops being a gift. It becomes an assumption. And assumptions don't generate gratitude, they generate entitlement. The thing you offered as your highest quality becomes the very mechanism by which you get taken for granted, overlooked, and eventually discarded when someone more useful comes along. Right, and this is the part that gets me every single time. The most loyal people are almost always the ones who end up most betrayed, not despite their loyalty. Because of it. Because unconditional loyalty removes the one thing that makes any relationship function with integrity: consequence. When there is no consequence for mistreating you, when someone knows with certainty that you will forgive, return, and continue showing up regardless of what they do, there is no incentive to treat you well. You have engineered your own mistreatment by making yourself impossible to lose. Machiavelli warned about this with a precision that still cuts after 500 years. He wrote that men are ungrateful, fickle, and deceitful, not as a condemnation of humanity, as a description of human nature under conditions of guaranteed access. When access is guaranteed, human nature defaults to taking. When access is uncertain, human nature defaults to valuing. This is not cynicism. This is the operating system. And once you understand the operating system, you stop being surprised by its outputs. The powerful never attach themselves to a person. They attach to a principle, to a purpose, to an alignment of interests that serves their growth, their protection, their evolution. And the moment that alignment ends, the moment the relationship stops serving the direction they're moving, they reassess, not with cruelty, not with drama. With the same calm clarity that a chess player uses when they recognize that a piece is no longer serving the position. Look, I know how that sounds. Cold, transactional, like I'm describing a way of moving through the world that strips the humanity out of connection. But stay with me here, because what I'm actually describing is the difference between loyalty as identity and loyalty as choice. Loyalty as identity means you stay because leaving would contradict who you believe yourself to be. Loyalty as choice means you stay because staying genuinely serves something real. And the moment it stops, you are free to go. One of those is a prison. The other is sovereignty. Machiavelli wrote that a wise man ought never to make himself depend wholly on one thing or one person, because dependence, complete unconditional dependence on a single source of anything, is the most efficient way to make yourself controllable. When someone knows you need them, they know they can afford to treat you badly. When someone knows you will never leave, they know there is no floor on how low they can go. Your absolute loyalty has removed the only protection you had, and you handed it over voluntarily, because you were taught that handing it over was the noble thing to do. Here's the ruthless reframe. Your allegiance belongs to your purpose, not to people. People change, alliances shift. The friend who knew you at your lowest is not automatically entitled to access to you at your highest. The mentor who helped you in one chapter does not own your loyalty in the next chapter if that loyalty has stopped serving your growth. The relationship that was real and meaningful at one point in your life does not have a permanent claim on your future self simply because of its history. History is not currency. Alignment is currency. And when alignment ends, the wise reassess. Here is the operational mechanism behind betrayals. The illusion of loyalty is often more powerful than loyalty itself. The perception that you are committed, dependable, aligned, without the reality of that commitment being unconditional, is the most sophisticated position available. It keeps others comfortable enough to trust you while keeping you free enough to act in your own genuine interest. This is not deception in the service of manipulation. It is clarity in the service of self-preservation. There is a difference, and it matters. The kings who fell throughout history, and Machiavelli studied them all, cataloged their failures with the cold precision of a surgeon, almost universally fell because they trusted too completely. They gave their full confidence to advisors who used it, their full loyalty to allies who sold it, their full devotion to institutions that outlasted their usefulness and then consumed them. The pattern repeats across centuries because the mechanism is the same. Absolute trust removes the vigilance that would have caught the betrayal before it became fatal. When you are too loyal, when people can predict with certainty that you will stay, forgive, and return, they stop fearing your withdrawal. And fear of withdrawal is the foundation of respect in any relationship where power is a factor, which is every relationship. The moment you become impossible to lose, you become easy to disrespect. The moment people know they can walk away and you'll be there when they come back, they start walking away, casually. Your presence stops being something they protect. It becomes something they assume. When people know you can walk away, genuinely, cleanly, without drama or the need for a final scene, they treat your loyalty as a privilege, something that can be lost, something worth maintaining. And that shift from assumed to earned, from guaranteed to contingent, is where respect lives, real respect, not the performance of respect that people offer to your face while taking you for granted behind it, the kind that operates even when you're not watching, because the cost of losing you is real and present in their awareness. You must learn to give your loyalty like it has weight, like it means something to extend it and something to withdraw it. Never like a reflex, never like a default, like a deliberate choice made with open eyes that you reserve the right to revisit when the conditions change. Because loyalty without discernment is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability dressed in noble clothing. And you have been vulnerable long enough. Because once you've reclaimed your loyalty, once you've made it selective, strategic, genuinely yours, there is one final shift remaining. The one that makes all of this permanent. The one that doesn't just change how you move through specific relationships or situations, but changes what you fundamentally are as a person. The shift that, once made, cannot be unmade. And it is the most demanding one of all, not because it requires the most action, but because it requires the most complete surrender of everything you've been using as a substitute for the real thing. There is a version of you that nothing can reach, not the version that performs strength, the one that posts the right things and says the right words and constructs the right image of someone who has it together. Not the version that armors itself with anger or bitterness or the particular coldness of someone who was hurt badly enough to decide that feeling was the enemy. Those are not power. Those are wounds wearing power's clothing. And if you look closely enough, you can always tell the difference, because performed strength is loud and real strength is extraordinarily quiet. The version I'm talking about is something different, something that gets built slowly, invisibly, in the accumulation of every shift we've covered, every time you withdrew your energy from someone who was feeding on it, every time you let pain teach you instead of just hurt you, every time you held your silence when every instinct said to explain, every time you walked away without begging, every time you enforced a boundary that cost you a relationship that wasn't serving you, every time you held your loyalty back until it was genuinely earned. Each of those moments was a brick, and what gets built from those bricks, quietly, without announcement, over the time most people spend waiting to feel ready, is something the world has no lever for. Untouchable is not a personality type. It is not a mood or a phase or a temporary state you enter when things are going well. It is the permanent condition of a person who has completed their own internal architecture, who has stopped outsourcing their stability to other people's behavior, who has built something inside themselves that does not require external conditions to remain standing. Machiavelli once wrote that he who is wise will be master of himself, for he who is mastered by others is never free. And look, freedom is the word most people reach for when they talk about what they want. Freedom from stress, freedom from toxic relationships, freedom from the constant low-grade anxiety of wondering what other people think of you, whether they're happy with you, whether your position in their life is secure. But here's the truth about where that freedom actually comes from. It does not come from finding the right people. It does not come from finally being understood or appreciated or chosen by someone whose choosing feels like confirmation. It comes from inside. It comes from the moment you decide, not intellectually, not as an aspiration, but as a lived reality, that your stability does not depend on any of those things. That decision is what untouchability actually is. To become untouchable, you must stop chasing love, approval, and validation, not because those things are worthless, but because chasing them makes you controllable. The moment someone understands that their approval matters to you, that their withdrawal of it creates distress you will work to relieve, they own something of you, something quiet and significant, and they will use it consciously or not, because that's what leverage does. It gets used. The untouchable have removed that ownership completely, not by becoming cold, by becoming complete. Think about what it would mean to move through a room, any situation, genuinely unafraid of how it goes, not performing confidence, not managing your anxiety well enough that it doesn't show. Actually unafraid, because the outcome, whatever it is, lands on a foundation that doesn't shift. Rejection doesn't destabilize you because your sense of worth is not located in the accepting. Criticism doesn't unravel you because your self-concept is not built from other people's assessments. Betrayal doesn't destroy you, and here's the part that changes everything. Because as we established when we talked about pain, you already know how to transmute it into something that serves you. That's the compounding effect of all 8 shifts working together. Each one individually changes something real. Together they create a person who is genuinely, structurally different from who they were before. Not harder in the brittle sense, harder in the way that certain materials become harder under pressure, more flexible, and more resistant simultaneously, capable of absorbing impact without fracturing. Machiavelli said it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And I want to be precise about what fear means in this context, because it is not about intimidation. It is not about making people afraid of what you'll do to them. It is about the specific feeling that arises in someone's nervous system when they realize that crossing you has a genuine cost, that you are not a person who absorbs unlimited amounts of mistreatment and returns to baseline, that there are things you will not forgive, lines you will not allow to be redrawn, and that your peace, your actual, internal, structural peace, does not require their participation to remain intact. That awareness in other people, that slight hesitation before they test you, is not fear in the destructive sense. It is respect in the most fundamental sense. The respect that says, this person knows their own worth and will act accordingly. and I cannot afford to find out what acting accordingly looks like for them. This is the structural distinction between performed strength and real power. The untouchable do not arrive at this state through aggression. They arrive through accumulation, through the patient, disciplined, often painful work of building something inside themselves that doesn't need to be maintained by anyone outside themselves. The work we've been doing across every shift in this conversation. The withdrawal of misplaced energy, the transmutation of pain, the weaponization of silence, the architecture of boundaries, the strategic distribution of loyalty. All of it building toward this, a person who is, in the most complete sense of the word, their own. To reach this stage, you must shed the last remnants of dependence. The need to justify your choices to people who didn't ask to be consulted. The need to forgive every violation because holding it feels unkind. The need to be recognized for what you've survived or what you've built or what you've become. Let go of all of it. Not with bitterness. Bitterness is just attachment wearing a darker coat. With genuine release. With the quiet understanding that you are no longer available for the validation economy, that you have withdrawn from it completely and built something self-sustaining in its place. The untouchable do not flinch, not because they feel nothing, but because what they feel lands on something solid. They are anchored to themselves in a way that cannot be uprooted by circumstance, by other people's cruelty, by loss, by failure, by the thousand small and large attempts the world makes every day to remind you that your worth is conditional and your position is precarious. It is not, and you know that now, not as a hope, as a fact. When you reach this level, and you will reach it if you do the actual work and not just collect the ideas, power becomes effortless. Not the power over other people, which is exhausting and temporary and ultimately hollow. The power over yourself, which is permanent and self-renewing, and the only kind that actually matters. People sense it before you say a word. They either respect it or they fear it, but they cannot ignore it, and they cannot touch it, because there is nothing exposed for them to reach. You are no longer a participant in other people's games. You are the standard. Before we close, drop this in the comments, "Nothing can break me." And then drop one more thing, the final one. The one that isn't a statement about what you've decided. It's a statement about what you've become. The world tried. It tested your patience, betrayed your trust, punished your kindness, and told you repeatedly that fairness was coming if you just kept being good enough, patient enough, forgiving enough. And for a long time you listened. You gave your energy to the unworthy. You begged for understanding from people who were studying your desperation. You let attachment chain you to disappointment and called it love, and called it loyalty, and called it strength. But that ends here. You've learned to withdraw from the ungrateful, not with anger, with clarity. You've learned to transmute pain into the most precise and personal kind of power available to a human being. You've killed the need to be understood by people whose understanding was never the point. You've detached from what was draining you and stopped mistaking that detachment for coldness. You've built the architecture of a person whose presence is earned, not assumed. You've mastered the silence that makes rooms rearrange themselves around you without a word. You've made your loyalty a sword, deliberate, weighted, pointed in the direction of your own purpose. And now you are here, at the place where all of it compounds into something singular, something the world has no name for except the one it uses when it doesn't understand something and is slightly afraid of it. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it coldness. They'll say you changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. Let them. Every label they give you is evidence that you are no longer legible to the people who needed you to stay small. And illegibility, as we've established, is protection. None of what you just went through is luck. None of it is easy. But every single shift you make in this direction removes one more lever the world had access to. One more way you could be moved without your consent. One more vulnerability that someone could find in the dark and use against you when you weren't paying attention. The untouchable are not born, they are built. In the fire of every situation that was supposed to destroy them and didn't. In the quiet accumulation of every decision to choose their own peace over someone else's comfort. In the patient, unglamorous daily work of becoming the kind of person who cannot be reached by the things that used to reach them. That is what you are becoming. That is what you already are, if you're honest about what these 8 shifts have already started in you. Walk through life with the clarity of someone who has done the work. Move without apology. Command without announcement. Rise without waiting for permission from people who were never qualified to grant it. If this found you at the right moment, and something tells me it did, hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because we go deeper on this every single week. You are no longer the version that bends. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. I am untouchable now.